Jim, there's been talk about Apple making some adjustments in its supply chain to supply the U.S. How permanent do you see that being, and how much flexibility do you sense they really have?
Well, first of all, they set up a great production coming and sourcing out of China. But with the evolution and the time of iPhone growth, as well as its Apple user growth beyond simply just North America, other countries have certain rules that are quite unique that people aren't familiar with. For example, in India, you get taxed heavily when you import production into India, and you can't own any store and operate a store if you're in India. So when Apple looks at this very complex supply chain right now centered in China, they are going to be looking at other factors, such as these national rules of owning and doing production in other countries like India, Vietnam, and places that will allow them to open up stores. And so we believe that this is an evolution, a stepping point, but importantly, as spoken earlier, the infrastructure of shipping, trucking, transportation, plastics, metals, bending, all that infrastructure needs to be in place. But we believe that it will happen, that Apple will indeed diversify its supply chain beyond China, what we know today.
Zanny, is that going to be the legacy of this trade war, you think, or is that even clear yet? More diversification into areas outside China, or is this just the U.S. kind of an isolated case where there are going to be some temporary changes made, but not so much long term?
No, I think this is a long-term shift.
Sorry, that's for Zanny.
I think this is a long-term shift, and I think it's a long-term shift because whatever the outcome of this current pace of the trade war, we are seeing a big shift in the U.S. in its relationship with China, and we have clearly moved towards a strategic competition kind of relationship. And I don't think that's going to go away anytime soon. And so the sense that there is high-tech rivalry and the concern about being too reliant on China is going to stay, and therefore I think all companies are going to have to rethink their supply chains in response to that. It's going to take a long time. It's not going to be overnight. But even if there is some kind of breakthrough at the next Trump-Xi meeting, don't expect this trend to stop. This is a permanent shift. The question is just how big it is, how deep it goes, and what it means for the future of globalization and for these supply chains.
Jim, I'm going to ask a question I've asked many times on our air before. I get that you're seeing these supply chain dynamics play out, these changes play out. I'll use the case of Apple, for example, in the midst of this U.S.-China trade war situation. But why can't a company like Apple start to bring some of its supply chain or some of its manufacturing back to the U.S. as well?
Well, I think some of the supply chain is going to continue to evolve, and some of it may come back to the U.S. in small amounts. But keep in mind that also the relative hourly cost of labor, plus the health care costs, retirement costs, unemployment costs, are simply a lot more expensive than shipping something via air or sea from internationally. But when we look at development, you have seen Apple actually expand its campus right here in California, as well as in Texas also. Those may not be assembly jobs. We have seen that the shift for production, years ago it was the shift to Mexico, then the shift to China. We're seeing now a shift to potentially Vietnam and India and other locations. Assembly simply as a lower cost tends to look for lower cost of labor. We do believe jobs are coming back to the U.S., some of them specifically more high-tech, some of them more programming jobs, some of the more high-touch jobs. Apple has been hiring in California and in Texas. Maybe not the assembly jobs we're talking a lot about today, but it's more higher-skilled labor.